Okay, so welcome to year 5 of our adult faith formation class, Mysticism, where science, art, and spirituality meet. I'm Bart, this is Marjorie. We got Bruce. Marjorie, you want to say something?
Bruce is our captive audience, a Buddhist from Canada who's been very faithfully with us. It's very nice. I want to say, especially for the sake of any newcomers seeing these videos for the first time, that we're doing this in the spirit of interfaith dialogue. Bart and I met 20-something years ago at the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Westport. And we are both confirmed Unitarian Universalists. I was born and raised in and around. My parents weren't really committed members of the congregation that we were, closest to, but my mother was very much engaged in that line of inquiry, and then developed her own elective curriculum in the American Transcendentalists. So,
and she taught that at the local high school.
Local integrated public high school.
Oh, wow.
Which was her calling, because she wanted to make these ideas available to particularly people of color who might not encounter it otherwise, and particularly young women. And she wanted to encourage them to go on to college, as she was encouraged as a young girl in Brooklyn who came from a very poor background, but she was very bookish. And like Bart, spent hours alone in the library, kind of raising herself up. And by the time she was in high school, she was in love with Einstein and, reading it deeply, and really wanted to be a physics major, and was for 1 year at Brooklyn College when she realized she just didn't have the formal math background. She tried teaching herself at the same time as taking classes, and taught herself to use a slide rule and things like that, and then just didn't have the time. So she switched to English. But I grew up with these ideas as the closest thing to any kind of religion in our household. And we went on pilgrimages to Walden Pond, and my parents started recycling and composting in the 70s, and stopped using insecticides and all of that. I didn't really realize how unusual it was at the time, until I was looking back much later. So to me, it's really kind of like coming back home. But I was always longing for more mysticism, and I didn't understand that until I was much older. And I was entranced by, my parents said my father built hi-fis for a hobby. I would be just glued to this Florida, I guess about waist height on an adult corner speaker, listening to Gregorian chant. And all their friends who were, mostly atheists, avowed atheists, would say, "What's up with Marjorie? Why is she listening to this Gregorian chant this way?" And they would say, "Well, we don't know. We're just afraid she's going to want to run off and become a nun when she grows up. But she's just, fascinated by anything to do with church music, like organ music." They played a lot of E Powerful Bigs on the hi-fi. That was a way to test it. And there was a church across the street that would play it, and I would just be enthralled by the vibrations through the floor of our brownstone. And Bart grew up with Eastern Rite, which is very similar to the Greek Orthodox. In his summers in Pennsylvania, that's what his mother's family was involved with. They were, people don't even realize there's so many different kinds of Catholicism. So in a way, it was the opposite thing, but it was very mystical. With their what do you call it? The polyphonic chants.
Yeah, it's polyphonic music. The chanting. There's incense. There's lots of processions by the priest and the altar boys up and down the aisle. There's a wooden wall that's at the front that has pictures and tableaus and frames of angels and cherubim and saints and whatever.
And it's gold leaf, a lot of it, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's all, yeah, they don't have any money.
So now we go to a Compline service every Sunday night at a local Episcopal church, and it's incense and candlelight and a cappella chanting. They're up in a
Loft.
loft in the church, which is built of stone. So the acoustics are just incredible. The first time I went there, I just sat there with tears streaming down my face. So it's kind of odd that Bart is this mathematician who functions as a physicist a lot. And that feels familiar to me because of my upbringing with my parents. And, you know, they would talk casually about electrons and atoms. And as I said, my father built hi-fis for a hobby, and he said you can't listen to Beethoven on a record player. You know, that was his motivation. But somehow we tried to set this up as a debate between us, but we kept ending up laughing. We couldn't do it because we agree too much. You know, we just can't. We're supposed to argue our own points of view and these kind of prearranged, you know, dialectics, and we would end up arguing each other's points of view. We just couldn't make it work. So we just finally said, look, we agree too much. We can't agree to disagree when we don't. So our approach is really kind of Unitarian. Bart became a Unitarian, what, about 25 years ago?
Yeah.
And that actually led him to some Buddhist explorations several years later with Bruce's twin brother, who was actually a Buddhist monk and a physicist. And they did a lot of thought experiments together. And here we are. You know, I was exposed to Buddhism in independent study in 9th grade, whatever form it was. I think it was pretty watered down. And then later in my life in New York, a form of Japanese Buddhism called Nichiren Buddhism, which is very, very different. There's very little relation to Zen. And these aren't just one thing. You know, Catholicism is not just one thing. Buddhism is not one thing. And Unitarianism is not one thing. And it's not that anything goes with Unitarians. We are recognized pacifists along with the Quakers. I believe that's a unique status, but our children are automatically conferred conscientious objector status if they seek it. If they grew up in Unitarian tradition, you can't really call it a faith. there's no dogma, but there are values, and pacifism is one. And this kind of the sense of relativity, we look at things as being symbolic. And I think that's one thing that I really like about Catholicism at the other end of the spectrum, is that I think it knows it's symbolic and it's not trying to be literally true, which I think a lot of Protestant traditions are. Um, but it's mystical. And that's what I was always longing for as a child and young adult, but I didn't know. Even when I was in college at the new school, I was, we didn't have a declared major, but I was basically a philosophy major. But none of it was satisfying to me. And then in the second semester, I discovered Spinoza, and I just adored him. And I went back to a professor from the first semester and said, well, I finally found a philosopher I really like. And he said, oh, really? Who? It was, kind of intrigued. And I said, well, Spinoza. He just really makes a lot of sense to me. And he said, well, of course you like Spinoza, Marjorie. You're a mystic. And I didn't.
Spinoza was raised Jewish, I
Right.
think, in Amsterdam, and he simply dropped out after a while and went his own way.
He was really doing his own thing. I think he was exposed to Kabbalah. I studied Kabbalah years later in New York, and that actually felt very natural to me. But I didn't know what to do with that information that I was a mystic. I just stared at him and put it aside. And I was probably 40 before I began to really understand it. And by then I had encountered Jung, who I consider to really be a post Piscean. He was really an avatar or a prophet for the age of Aquarius. I ended up becoming a Jungian astrologer. And I think the Buddha and Jesus were really embedded in the age of Pisces. And in their own ways, talking about a lot of the same things, a lot of compassion and unity. And there's nothing wrong with those things. They're very, very important. But I don't consider myself a badge carrying Unitarian, but it's where I've ended up the most comfortable. And I've been active in our congregation for about 20 years. And Bart has been for about 25 years. And for example, one of my offerings is labyrinth walks. And for me, they're always interfaith. And the way I do that is with particularly chant music, but all kinds of music from all the different faith traditions. And I feel that labyrinths are a universal archetype. The Christians appropriated them as they appropriated many things.
They're found on every continent,
doors.
in every age. So
Right.
there's nothing.
Every religion, every culture, every walk of life. The fishermen, did them before they went out to sea. Warriors did them before they went to battle. A lot of pagan, quote unquote pagan groups worshiping the goddess and so on. But I find there to be something just very energetically powerful there that's universal. I think it's a true archetype. And so Bart and I have been doing that together for about 5 years. And I just didn't know where else to position it. I wanted them to be for peace. the first walk I did was in commemoration of the war in Iraq. And it was on September 11th. And I wanted it to be interfaith. I wanted people of all faiths to come and find their universal, connections and overlaps and intersections and live happily ever after, because they walked a labyrinth together to each other's sacred music. And then I found out that that was exactly the vision of a Sufi named Samuel Lewis, who created the Dances of Universal Peace along those exact same lines. And he was Sufi and he was a Universalist. And I didn't really know much. That was a faith that we joined with in the early 60s. I didn't really know much about. And there it is. So then I started inviting groups of those people. The Sufis
there were
offering
dances.
doing these dances. But we would combine these events. They're circle dances, but as you're dancing, you're actually doing mudras with your hands and joining hands, and it's an energy practice. It's not just folk dances. It seems like folk dances, but it's truly a spiritual body practice and a form of prayer. And the unity that you experience in a group is just amazing. We had people from 5 years old to 85 years old dancing together for that very first one, and from every walk of life. So that's was really a dream come true for me, and a vision. And I just can't imagine hosting it anyplace else. I became very involved in the local interfaith community. Eventually was disillusioned by that, because they're all just perpetuating their own agendas, and, still at war. So it's difficult for me, but so I just want to say to newcomers coming that this is a Unitarian context that we're presenting it in, but it is really an interfaith space. And we're not trying to convert anybody to Unitarianism or any other faith. And we're not proselytizing Jung's point of view, but we are talking about the archetypes that we feel underlie all the religious traditions that we feel they're talking about, excuse me, in symbolic terms, with metaphor and a lot of images, and there's a lot of overlap between all the traditions. So am I leaving anything out?
No, that's good.
I'm sorry, I'm weak.
Yeah, I mean, Westport is now probably 20 to 30% Jewish in its population. So these schools actually closed for the high holy days because the kids are not in school. It's a significant chunk of the town. So right now we're going into what is it, Yom Kippur right now? Is
the high holy days.
It's starting right now. And there are 4 synagogues in the town of 25,000, which is a tip-off. There's another, I want to say 15, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. But you can see the nature of the town anyway. The only other thing I wanted to add to what Margie was talking about was she triggered it with this comment she made that when I worked for 8 years with Ed Arthurs at Bell Laboratories, and Ed had grown up in Brooklyn, and he decided that he really didn't want to get too far away from home, so he went to Cooper Union in New York City. And because he's in Brooklyn and you got to take the subway over there and so forth, he would go to the cafeteria and study and until like the traffic died down, and then he would go take the subway back home. And this one guy would show up, once a week and just be reading a book in the Cooper Union cafeteria. So he went over and introduced himself, and it turned out this guy was Albert Einstein's assistant down in Princeton, and the guy lived in New York City, but had his son going to Cooper Union, and that's why he was there in the cafeteria. So Ed spent a lot of time with this guy, learning, firsthand what Einstein was thinking about in terms of physics and why this worked and why that didn't work and so forth. So I was always amazed at how the ways of the world. So Ed was there for 2 years at Cooper Union, and the dean called him in and he said, "Look, quite frankly, you're wasting your time here. So I've got you a full scholarship to MIT." And so Ed went to MIT, and he actually went on to the MIT faculty for 6 years, and then decided to go to Bell Labs. Hard as it is to believe, there was more academic freedom at that point in time at Bell Labs than there was at MIT. Go figure. So with that, let's jump into what we got here. Here's a PowerPoint. See if I can get to it. Go down here. See if this will do it. No. That's what I love about these computers.
They make everything
Here it is.
so much easier.
I got it. Okay, so this is the start of year 5, and we've just got some graphics here. This is meant to show resonance or waves of all different sorts. We're going to leave you with the message that really everything is made up of waves. Even things that you think are matter are in fact waves, and we'll get to that. And that's something that Bruce's brother Ron observed. And just here's a picture showing various electrical signals zipping around someone here. So just something to start with. But what we're going to cover, we're going to have to set the foundations here for all of this. So let's go back to real foundations.
Just move the thing out of the way of the logo. That's our logo.
Right, there's the logo here. So this is the AlephTalks logo, and this is the Greek Aleph here, and Hebrew Aleph, excuse me, going from alpha to omega from the start to the finish in the Greek alphabet. So that's what we have here. So the thing to keep in mind here with foundations was both Marjorie and I had read a book that showed up in the 1973-75 timeframe called The Tao of Physics, or The Way of Physics. And it was written by a physicist, Fritjof Capra. And at that point in time, there'd been a huge amount of activity in particle physics, and all of these particles all over the place and different theories pulling them all together. And he wrote this book to say that there's this incredible complexity there, but maybe we in the West should go to the East and look at the ideas that we find there with the Tao of Lao Tzu and with the ideas from Hinduism and from the Buddha. And maybe we'll get some fresh ideas that will make all of these different things gel. His reward for doing this was he was ignored. That was par for the course.
I think he was
What else
banished.
could you expect? And the West went in its own way, and in 1975 they codified something which is in physics called the standard model. So it encompasses everything, all of the particles and energies of fields that are there in what is today physics. And I remember this very clearly. When I was in graduate school, I had an office that actually was with a bunch of these physicists, and they were all doing these totally incredible calculations and simulations on an IBM 360 Model 50 that the Atomic Energy Commission bought for the physics department. And then they were all going over to CERN, which is this particle accelerator. You go to Geneva, but it's actually in France. And the experiments they were doing were mind-boggling, and it was a really exciting time. And you were left with the impression that all of this stuff was coming together in physics, and they had discovered, well, Newton came up with something which he called gravity. There wasn't any such thing till Newton named it, for attracting all mass, all particles attract one another. So there was gravity, and then there was what we call electromagnetism, with electricity and magnetism, and that had a whole bunch of activities in it. And then there was what was discovered in the same time frame in the 60s and 70s was there was the strong force, which allowed nuclei to stay together, because nuclei are made up of protons and neutrons, and the neutrons have no charge, and the protons are all positively charged. And we learned in electricity 101 that like types of things repel. So negatives repel negatives, and positives repel positives. And yet the nucleus of the atom, all of these protons were glued to one another. So they came up with a strong force that apparently electromagnetism flips on very, very short scales, so that what becomes repelling becomes attractive. Go figure. And then there was another force, which they called the weak force, where the neutrons in the nucleus would spontaneously decay, and they'd give off a proton and an electron. So the proton would be attracted by the other protons in the nucleus by the strong force, and the electron would be driven away, go off to wherever. And then there was something called the neutrino. So the weak force was what we would call today radioactive decay. And all of these things were coming together, and all of these physicists were thinking, boy, we're going to have all of physics wrapped up in another 10 years. We're really cooking here. And that got us up to 1975 in this standard model, which consists of 16 different particles, which could also be framed as resonant energy forms. And there's a 17th one that was actually experimentally measured in 2012 called the Higgs boson. So there's now 17 of these things, and there's been virtually no progress whatsoever over 50 years. Nothing's happened. And when you get into this sort of thing and you look at it, what's happened in other eras of physics, when there's kind of a lot of experiments, a lot of theories, people doing it, it gets to be very philosophical, because they realize that they hit a wall and they need some new ideas. And we're right now at the stage where those ideas are coming together. And what you're going to see here is my take on what those ideas will be, which worked with Ron Cohen on. And the ideas have a lot to do with the fact that what we think of as the underlying geometry for our universe, the space and time that we see around us, is in fact not at all what it is. And if we looked at the right arena, we'd make much more progress in physics in terms of being able to do anything interesting. And similarly, this would inspire a lot of interesting mathematics. The two go hand in hand. In fact, what I'm going to argue is the mathematics is more fundamental than the physics. But we'll get there. We'll see what's going on. So this is really, a change in view. The Tao of physics was an attempt to take a different view, to think outside the box. Here we're going to take a different view and try and, from a foundational point of view, think the science we're going to be talking about here is going to be based on a very different underlying geometry for the universe, and that'll have a lot of interesting consequences. So,
and Capra's work was considered kind of heresy at the time in the science community,
well,
which can be just as dogmatic as the religious community.
Well, he was a very good physicist, but you're doing something outside the club,
right?
So that never, you got to popularize it, and he did some popularizing, and then he gave up because he said not going to happen. So our outline for this, and we'll see how far we make it today, is we'll take a look at different epochs, different eras of science, and then we're left with a basic problem here, that what we call science is really at a crossroads, because roughly 100 years ago, it became clear that we were studying 5% of the mass and energy in the universe, and the other 95%, we weren't able to measure, we weren't able to say anything about it. So it was called dark matter and dark energy. And for 100 years, rest assured, people have been racking their brains trying to figure out how to explain this other 95%. That's what Ron Cowan was able to do. And I'm simply, building on his observations to try and show you what this is going to look like. But it's still not mainstream. We have to get other physicists and mathematicians to buy into doing this. But I'm quite convinced that we're on the right path, and that this is a good place to go. But it's not at all what you might think of. It's a very different path than other people have taken. And the other side of things with this, the other reason for this class was increasingly in everyday life, everything has been going toward materialism. So having spirituality as an integral part of your life just starts to be less and less important to people. And in the United States, now the largest single group is a group that calls themselves spiritual, but not affiliated with any organized religion. So, for example, this guy, J.D. Vance, who's Trump's vice presidential candidate, he would classify himself as this, but then just a few months ago, he decided to become a Catholic. So go figure. But the point is that in the United States, when it came to spirituality, people left the European continent and came to the New World because they didn't want to be caught up with the church, and they were here for religious freedom. So that it was that important that they would risk everything and come to this new world, and possibly die on the trip over, let alone die when they're here. And also the after the American Revolution, there was a big revival and interest in spirituality. It was called the second wave, the second coming. And so if you could imagine, in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, there would be sermons given at different churches on Sunday. they would be printed up and they would be posted into these public houses, and people would go to the public houses and be drinking coffees or beers and reading these sermons and discussing them. I mean, it's like, you know, you ask yourself, what are you talking about? It's like inconceivable that people would do that. And that's after the Civil War, so many people got caught up with materialism, with building the railroads, putting in steel mills, doing everything to create the economy that we have today. And the spirituality side of things just has dropped. So it goes. So we're going to then turn to, what do we mean by mysticism? What can science do to resolve this? Is there some place for mathematics? I'll argue that doing mathematics is very much like doing meditation, that you're in a deep thought process and you're reaching out to sense how other things fit together. What can art do in all of this? And finally, what is spirituality? So that's our outline. Here we go. We'll see how far we make it tonight. So for background, this is really Western science. We had Newton, who from 1665 to the 1680s, he codified a theory of gravity, and he postulated there was a geometry of space being three dimensions, up, down, back, forth, and left, right, three dimensions. And there was this totally separate thing called time. And so this theory, as we'll see, was incomplete and was corrected by Einstein. But it was a start, and it was able to explain the orbits of planets and moons and asteroids and so on. When we get into the 1850s, there'd finally been enough experiments done with electricity. So you had Ben Franklin with his kite, and he flew a kite in a thunderstorm, and he put a key at the end of the kite was actually on a wire, wasn't a string or anything, a rope. And the wire, when the thunderstorm hit, had electricity conduct down to the key, and Franklin could see this sparks coming off the key, and this led him to the idea of creating a lightning rod. And so he did this in the 1740s, whatever, 1750s, and he spread the word on this, and all over Europe, all these churches immediately started getting lightning rods because their steeples were being blasted by these lightning bolts. And so when Franklin went over to Europe, representing the colonies in the Revolutionary War, going to France in particular, he was hailed as a hero. He was the one that was this great scientist that allowed all these French churches to keep their steeples, not have them blown out of the sky by the lightning bolt. So then there was also people like Michael Faraday, who did really great experiments, but Faraday simply wasn't a theorist, someone who was mathematically skilled enough. That was James Clerk Maxwell, who looked at all of these things: Faraday, Franklin, Volta, the list goes on and on, of all kinds of people that had done Gauss was in there doing experiments in electromagnetism, and Maxwell codified all of this experimental data into a set of equations for electromagnetism. One of the problems with what Maxwell did was that all of these experiments were done to what we would call today DC, or no frequencies really, or very low frequencies. That's what Faraday did. He had a transient in a magnetic field that induced the flow of electricity, in a coupled wire system, but it was at very low frequencies. And it was really Nikola Tesla who in the 1880s, 1890s, was able to build equipment that could generate electromagnetic energy in the millions of times per second band. And he saw that there were some extra terms that Maxwell missed in his equations, but it was no fault of Maxwell. He didn't have any data. Tesla had the data, and he was able to include these extra terms and came up with a lot of interesting things. In the 1920s, after all kinds of other experiments that were going on with roughly the 1900 time frame up through the 1920s, there was enough experiments done on the microcosm, on what would we call atomic physics, that this led to the notion of having an atom, which people thought was the fundamental unit in chemistry. But it turned out the physicists showed that the atom would, in fact, had parts to it. It had electrons, and then it had a very small nucleus with protons and neutrons. And the theory of quantum mechanics explained how these things interacted with one another. And in particular, it did a lot to explain modern chemistry, modern inorganic chemistry. One of the problems with this theory was it was an incomplete theory because it had experiments floating around that we've seen. There was, for example, a so-called double slit experiment for electrons, where an electron beam was shot at a slit, and the electrons all went through the slit and came out the other side in a line. No surprises there. And then there were two slits that were placed very close to one another, and electrons were shot at that. And instead of having just two lines of electrons on the sides of the slit, we ended up having a wave pattern with interference and reinforcement and destructive and positive reinforcement of waves, which created a wave interference pattern. So what was an electron behaved as a particle with one slit, but it behaved as a wave with two slits. Now, this was actually corrected by this individual, David Bohm, when he came up in the 1960s with what's called a pilot wave theory of quantum mechanics, where there's actually a wave that senses this, a pilot wave, and then once it senses that there's two slits rather than one slit, the electron turns into a wave. That doesn't explain, why it does this. It just says that's how it does it. Then there was another activity in the 1950s where it was shown that quantum mechanics was completely consistent with what's called the many worlds timeline. So you could conceive of the world that we live in actually has events occurring all the time. We could go to bed right now, or we could go turn on TV. Those are two different things we could go do. But there's other things that could happen. For example, we could turn a light on, which would generate some flow of electrons, and the electrons might change energy levels. And each of those different energy levels would themselves create different possible world timelines. And there's nothing that says that the theory of quantum mechanics that we have is inconsistent with this so-called many worlds timelines. Each world has its own timeline. So that's showing here that the physicists were happy to come up with a theory for quantum mechanics, but they also had basic things that they couldn't explain, like these timelines flying all over the place. And when we get into the time when I was involved in the 50s through the 70s, there was a huge amount of activity in high energy particle physics, and they created this so-called standard model. And the standard model is incomplete because it doesn't include this notion of dark matter or dark energy, and it doesn't include gravity. It doesn't include space, which is really where the dark energy resides. And so in that sense, it's incomplete. And as we saw before, the dark matter and dark energy make up 95% of the universe. So this is not a minor hit, but we were able to explain 5% of it by 1975. So today, what's going on is there's a huge amount of activity with people looking at the actual underlying geometry of the universe and trying to extend and combine and mash together all of these different ideas to come up with something that would be able to explain these things that can't be explained. And this is where what Ron Cowan observed is really significant for bridging this gap, showing what's going on here. So that's just some background. I just realized this is so obvious. I just want to put it in there to make it clear. In all of these things, we have pictures of what we think is the geometry of the universe. So as far as Newton was concerned, there were 3 dimensions for space, and time was a totally separate activity, and gravity was some sort of force here where the pieces of matter and space attracted one another. That was Newton's view of the world. And so the underlying geometry is 3 dimensions of space and something else called time that's separate. So we go forward in time to Einstein, and in 1905, he showed there was a linkage between space and time. In fact, they weren't separate. And in fact, there really were 4 dimensions here. The time and space are coupled together. And the reason for him saying this was that if you took particles and you accelerated them faster and faster, as they tried to approach the speed of light, the clock on that particular particle would slow down. Time would slow down. And so that was a tip-off that something was wrong here. There was a coupling here between space and time with these 4 dimensions. And Einstein ran with this a lot more over the next 10 years and combined space and time together to create, with space and time, something that could be curved. So I've got a picture over here of that. Here is something like the sun. Here's a planet running around the sun, and the sun is so massive that it curves space and time. So space and time is this mesh that we see here, and the planet is zipping around on this thing, but this sun is so powerful that it depresses space and time, so the planet runs around just on the edge of this thing. It orbits the sun in this way, and if it was any slower, it would fall into the sun. So that was what Einstein observed. But as a consequence of this, when you get into stronger and stronger gravitational fields, time slows down. So clearly we're still missing something. We had space and time coupled to one another, but now gravity gets in here to increase time. So there's some coupling between these things. When we get to the 1960s, there was finally some measurements done on our galaxy, the Milky Way. And one of the things that had been observed in Einstein's work in general relativity was it was possible to have bodies that were so massive that light itself could not escape from them. This well that was here was so great that if there was any light here that was emitted on the surface of this entity, say it was some sort of object, then the light, because of the gravity being so strong, would get little ways up and then fall back in. And so John Wheeler at Princeton gave these things the name of black holes. So the gravity is so strong that light cannot escape, and that's why it's called black. You can't see anything. Now, in the 1960s, we discovered that every galaxy, but in particular our galaxy, has one of these in the center of the galaxy. This is not a made-up story. This is actually for real. And the one that's in the center of our galaxy has 4 trillion masses of our sun. So it's incredibly massive, but it's at this other hand very small. There's other galaxies that have been observed that have 100 trillion masses of our sun for the black hole that's in the center of them. And it appears that every galaxy has this. So the geometry of the universe that we have is always distorted by these incredible black hole masses that are there. And it appears there's lots of little black holes that are floating around all over the place, and that creates some other problems. So Ron Cowan did a lot of very deep meditation in the 2016 to 2019 timeframe that I worked with him. And in particular, what he did was he chose to go back and observe the geometry of the universe back when it started. It was observed that all of the galaxies that astronomers could see were moving away from one another. So if they were moving away from one another, then they probably all started off at some common point. And Ron, under deep meditation, went back in time and observed the starting point and observed that the whole universe that we're in had actually compacted down to something very small. And in particular, he observed that space itself, the space itself is quantized. That is, space is made up of compartments. The compartments are incredibly small. They're 15 orders of magnitude smaller than anything that we would see in the nucleus of an atom, but they appear to be there. And as the universe contracted, these pieces of space foam contracted. They shrank down until everything got to a stage where it bounced, where it couldn't contract anymore, and it just bounced back from that point. And one of the consequences of Ron's observations was when he was observing this, he saw the universe there, which was compacted down, but he also saw there was something else. There was a void that was where the universe was. So there's something that's not space, it's simply emptiness that's there that our universe lives in. And in the late 1970s, it became clear from a lot of theoretical physics that there actually are many such universes where our universe is unique. There's probably billions and billions of universes. We happen to be in one of them. But the thing that was interesting to me about what Ron observed with our universe was when he looked at these space compartments, what he saw was that the space compartments were coated with blocks of information. And these blocks of information were always scanning the surroundings. And whenever they detected a change, they had algorithms in these information blocks that would act to change what was going on with this particular space compartment. And so these information blocks, in fact, control the forces and fields that are in our universe. That's what underlies everything. And it could very well be that we have a set of parameters in these algorithms for our universe. And if we look at some of these other universes, they might have the same algorithms, but different parameters. So they end up with different universes. So there's nothing to believe that our universe is unique. There could be lots and lots of other types of universes out there. So this is really mind-boggling when you look at all this coming about from these observations. Now, I mentioned before that when we get to this stage in physics where there's a kind of a dead end, physics gets to be very philosophical, very think outside the box, be very spiritual, be very different, because they realize that whatever theories they have don't work, and they're going to have to extend things, and that's the way it goes. So the person that I chose here is Albert Einstein, because he really thought outside the box among all of these physicists that were there at the time, and he was very vocal about this. Of course, he was asked, what does it feel like to be the smartest man on earth? And he said, I don't know, you have to go ask Nikola Tesla. So go figure. But anyway, Tesla was in this league. He was incredibly spiritual and an incredible experimentalist as well as theorist. So let's look at what Einstein had to say. So a lot of people think that spirituality and science are not compatible with one another, that in some sense science is its own religion. And Einstein's view was nothing could be further from the truth. Just to start with, he said, concerning what we call matter, we've all been wrong. What we call matter is really energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. But matter is really spirit or vibration reduced to the point of visibility. There is no matter. And this matches really what Ron Cowan observed. He observed that the fundamental building blocks in these atoms are what we call subquarks. And for matter, they consist of 10 strings that are vibrating, and the strings vibrate, and this resonance draws in energy that's inside the strings. And so there really isn't any particle there. It's really a resonance of energy. With dark matter, there's only 5 strings. So it doesn't vibrate nearly as much, but it still is a subquark, and you end up with dark matter. So concerning matter or dark matter, both of them are simply energy inside these vibrating strings. Then the next thing is time and space aren't conditions in which we live, but these are modes by which we think. So the people think these are real, but they're not. The physical concepts are what the human mind created, and it doesn't seem like the external world really has determined them. And that's exactly what Ron Cowan observed, is as we'll see here. Or equivalently, time does not exist. We invented it. Time is what the clock says. This is a distinction between the past, present, and future that's only a stubbornly persistent illusion. So this is really shocking to a lot of people. What do you mean? I know all about time. What's your problem? I think 99 times and find nothing. Then I stop thinking. I swim in the silence. This is where he's meditating and concentrating. And then the truth comes to me. So he's perceiving what the true reality is here in this time of silence. So the intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. It comes as a leap in consciousness. I call it intuition or what you will, but the solution comes to you, and you don't know how or why. A great French mathematician, Henri Poincaré, around 1900, wrote a book on how he did mathematics. And he said, well, I just concentrate on this stuff, and I think about it, and I'm thinking about it and thinking about it, and I'm getting off the trolley car, and it comes to me. That's the answer. So, it's just showing you these people that are great physicists, mathematicians, whatever, that they arrive at these great leaps through intuition or through meditation or prayer, and they don't do it any other way. There isn't. They don't know how or why they did this. So a human being experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, as a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. So this delusion of consciousness is a kind of prison for us. We sit here and we look out of our eyes, and we're left with the impression that there's a little person there behind those eyes that's looking out at the whole world. And that's all very interesting, but it isn't what's going on at all. And the task here is to free yourself from this prison by having a different metaphor, a different geometry, if you will, that will widen our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. And our separation from each other by itself is an optical illusion. So this is Einstein at his best. And a lot of people would say, well, this is heresy. This can't possibly be what's going on. But I think he's really, he's onto something, and he realizes that this is really what is fundamental to any sort of underlying theory of what would become mathematical physics. And we're simply not there yet. We haven't been able to figure out how to incorporate the different ideas he just described. So here we have, when something vibrates, the electrons of the entire universe resonate. So everything is connected. Everything resonates with everything else. And the greatest tragedy of human existence is some illusion that we're separate from one another. We're not. All of these interactions, all of these vibrations couple everything to everything else. So reality is merely an illusion, but it's a very persistent one. We like to think about it, but we have a long way to go to overcome this notion of what we think is reality. We're all souls dressed up in these biochemical garments that we call our bodies, and these are instruments through which our souls play their music. So again, lots of metaphors here trying to describe this, but his point is that the soul is really the fundamental thing here, and it'll put on a body, and then the body will die off, and then we'll get another body, and that'll die off. So implicit in what he's saying here is the notion of incarnation and reincarnation again and again and again. So when you examine the lives of most influential people who have ever walked among us, you discover one thread that winds through all of them. They've been aligned first with their spiritual nature, and only then with their physical selves. That's really the crux of it here, is they're able to link up to their spiritual nature, their soul, and in doing so, they realize who they really are, and this allows them to have impact on other people, to influence people to follow them. So the true value of a human being can be found in the degree to which that human being has attained liberation from the self. So again, here we have this notion in Buddhism of achieving enlightenment, of being able to liberate yourself from what you think is what you think the little person behind your eyes is seeing. The ancients knew something which we seem to have forgotten. The more I learn of physics, the more I'm drawn to metaphysics. Metaphysics is above physics, metaphysics. One thing I've learned in a long life is that all our science measured against reality is primitive and childlike. We still don't know 1,000th of 1% of what nature has revealed to us. It's entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, there's worlds that are hidden of which we're unaware. And that's really been picked up on by modern day astronomy and the underlying physics that goes with all this stuff. So again, here's Einstein on spirituality and science. I'm not an atheist. People accused him of being an atheist. The problem that's involved here is too vast for our limited minds. We're in the position of a little child entering a huge library with books in many languages. So the child knows someone must have written those books. The common idea that I'm an atheist is based on a big mistake. Anyone who interprets my scientific theories this way doesn't really understand them. And from my point of view, everything is determined. Everything has a beginning and an end by forces over which we have no control. So it's determined for the insect as well as for the star, and for human beings, and for vegetables or cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. And this is again what Ron Cowan observed, is these blocks of information that pervade all of the universe. They're the invisible piper that's controlling everything. So the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It'll transcend a personal God and avoid dogma and theology. There won't be a person with a long beard and a throne and a male. It could be a woman sitting there as a personal God. It will be this, again, this collective unconsciousness that is what Ron Cowan observed. So energy cannot be created or destroyed. We can only change it from one form of energy to another. And this is what engineering is really all about, doing these things. Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. So you match the frequency of the reality you want, and you can't help but get that reality. It can't be any other way. This is not philosophy, this is physics. So I'm very happy because I want nothing from anyone. I don't care about money. Decorations, titles, distinctions mean nothing to me. I don't crave praise. I claim credit for nothing. A happy man is too satisfied with the present to dwell too much on the future. Here you have Einstein. Then there's just some short quotes here. Logic will get you from A to Z, but imagination will get you everywhere. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. This was drilled into me by these physicists, that fellow grad students at MIT, and they were always pushed. They would do these incredibly complicated calculations and simulations, and their faculty advisor would always push them to, can't you explain simply what's going on here? And that would drive them to realize a lot of times this allowed them to catch errors, mistakes in their simulations, simply because when you do a simulation, you're writing a program, and it's hard enough to get a program to work that you know what its behavior is. When you do the simulation, you don't know what the behavior ought to be. That's why you're doing the simulation, is to see what the outcome is. So they really learned a lot by trying to come up with a simple explanation to what was going on. Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. The only source of knowledge is experience. Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile. Imagination is everything. It's the preview of life's coming attractions. There are two ways to live. You can live as if nothing is a miracle, or you can live as everything is a miracle. And then finally, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It's the source of all art and science. So there you have it. Because we're dealing with religion here, Einstein, whenever he lectured at US universities, was typically asked by students, do you believe in God? And he always answered, I believe in the God of Spinoza. Now, Spinoza, Baruch de Spinoza, was a Dutch philosopher, considered to be one of the great rationalists of the 17th century, along with René Descartes. Spinoza was raised as a Jew, and when he went into adulthood, he just disengaged from Judaism and went his own way. So what God is Spinoza following? According to Spinoza, God would say, stop praying and pounding your chest. What I want you to do is to go out into the world and enjoy your life. I want you to sing, have fun, and enjoy everything I've made for you. Stop going into those dark, cold temples that you built yourself, saying that those are my house. These are the churches and synagogues and mosques and so forth. My house is in the mountains, in the woods, the rivers, the lakes, the beaches. That's where I live, and that's where I express my love for you. Stop blaming me for your miserable life. I never told you there was anything wrong with you, or that you were a sinner, or that your sexuality was a bad thing. But sex is a gift I've given you, and with which you can express your joy, your ecstasy, your joy, your love. So don't blame me for everything they made you believe. Stop reading alleged sacred scriptures that have nothing to do with me. You can't read me in a sunrise, in a landscape, in the caring of your friend, in your son's eyes. You won't find me in a book. Stop asking me, will you tell me how to do my job? And stop being so scared of me. I don't judge you or criticize you or get angry or bothered. I am pure love. Stop asking for forgiveness. There's nothing to forgive. If I made you, filled you with passions, limitations, pleasures, feelings, needs, inconsistencies, free will, how can I blame you if you respond to something I put in you? How can I punish you for being the way you are if I'm the one who made you? Do you think I could create a place to burn all my children who behave badly for the rest of eternity? And what kind of a God would do that? You could see how this would go over in the 1600s with the church in Europe. Respect your peers and don't do what you don't want for yourself. All I ask is you pay attention in your life, that alertness is your guide. My beloved, this life is not a test. It's not a step on the way. It's not a rehearsal. It's not a prelude to paradise. This life is the only thing here and now, and it is all you need. I've set you absolutely free. No prizes or punishments, no sins or virtues, no one a marker, no one keeps a record. You're absolutely free to create in your life heaven or hell. I can't tell you if there's anything after this life, but I can give you a tip. Live as if there is not, as if this is your only chance to enjoy, to love, to exist. So if there's nothing, then you'll have enjoyed the opportunity I gave you. And if there is something, rest assured that I won't ask you if we behaved rightly or wrongly. I'll ask you, did you like it? Did you have fun? What did you enjoy the most? What did you learn? And of course, do you want to do it again? Stop believing in me. Believing is assuming, guessing, imagining. I don't want you to believe in me. I want you to feel me in you when you kiss your beloved, when you tuck in your little girl, when you pet your dog, when you bathe in the sea. Stop praising me. What kind of an egomaniac God do you think I am? I'm bored being praised. I'm tired of being thanked. Feeling grateful? Prove it by taking care of yourself, your health, your relationships, the world. Express your joy. That's the way you praise me. Stop complicating things and repeating as a parakeet what you've been taught about me. What do you need more miracles for? So many explanations. The only thing for sure is that you're here, that you're alive, and that the world is full of wonders. So there you have it. That's the God of Spinoza, and that's Einstein's take on it. So you can see many people get caught up with Einstein and one particular aspect of him, but he was a very deep person and thought very deeply about these things, and really didn't fool himself. He continually attacked quantum mechanics as being an incomplete theory. He worked very hard, but he couldn't figure out how to make it a more complete theory to explain things like this double slit experiment. But in part, he didn't have the observations of Ron Cowan on this double slit experiment to be able to explain it. If he had that, then he probably would have done something. So now we come to the core of the course. It's dealing with mysticism here, and let's try and define mysticism. This is trying to set terms so we can have a good discussion about these things. So mysticism is popularly known as becoming one with God or the absolute, but it may refer to any kind of ecstasy or altered state of consciousness, which is given a religious or spiritual meaning. It may also refer to the attainment of insight in ultimate or hidden truths and a human transformation supported by various practices and experiences. So the term mysticism itself has ancient Greek origins with various historically determined meanings. It's derived from the Greek word, this is M micro U omega, and then MUO, meaning to close or to conceal. Mysticism is referred to the biblical, liturgical, spiritual, and contemplative dimensions of early and medieval Christianity. During the earlier modern period, the definition of mysticism grew to include a broad range of beliefs and ideologies related to extraordinary experiences and states of mind. So here we have someone out in a forest contemplating a sunrise with all of nature around them. This is a mystic experience. In modern times, mysticism's required a limited definition with broad applications, as in meaning the aim at the union with the absolute, the infinite, or God. So this union, this limited definition, has been applied to a wide range of religious traditions and practices who value mystical experience as a key element of mysticism. And since the 1960s, there's been a debate over the merits of perennial and constructionist approach in scientific research of mystical experiences. The perennial position is now largely dismissed by scholars, and most scholars use the contextual approach, which considers the cultural and historical context, which is probably wrong, but this is what's actually happening. So mysticism tells us that the world we see with our eyes and mind is really an illusion. We have many examples of that. I just listed some here. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest books that we have, describing what arose in Sumer, probably before Egypt. But we could include the Egyptian Book of the Dead, for example, as a different example. That the Book of the Dead and the Epic of Gilgamesh both say that what we see with our eyes and minds is an illusion. The Mahabharata, which contains the Bhagavad Gita, this poem is 8 times as long as the Iliad and the Odyssey put together, which is viewed by the West as a real pinnacle of poetry. This other work, again, says exactly that the world that we see with our eyes and minds is an illusion. When Moses came down with the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Torah, Moses saw that the world we see with our eyes and minds is an illusion. If we look into the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, especially in book 3, the sutras 25 to 30 in book 3, what we'd see there is, again, that if we focus in deep meditation, that we'd see that the world around us is really an illusion. The 4 Noble Truths of the Buddha, when through deep meditation and when we go through the Abhidhamma, teach the same thing. The Essenes, which are the most mystic of the sects of Judaism, that were medical healers. This is probably where Jesus the Nazarene received his training. They all viewed the world we see as an illusion after deep prayer. And what Jesus the Nazarene and Mary Magdalene, his wife, taught was the way. The way says that if we learn to pray, if we learn to meditate, then what we see in the world around us with our eyes and minds clearly is an illusion. The Cathars of southern France, from 1000 to 1200, before the Catholic Church went in and massacred them all, they followed the way in their own view of things, and they taught exactly this. And when we come to much more modern time, just as an example, the collective unconsciousness of what Carl Jung saw as controlling the world around us suggested that our eyes and minds are really just seeing an illusion. And there really is a law of one, the law of this collective unconsciousness that governs everything. Bruce, who's with us, is an example of arguing that what we see is an illusion. Or am I overstating it, Bruce? Do you say you see much more texture to it? How would you frame it?
Well, the biggest thing is that the biggest thing that changed my life is when I meditated, started to meditate. When you meditate, you have deeper insights into the levels of reality of in the mind. And Ron is a very good example of that, what he did. So, I mean, he was able to observe subatomic particles in his meditation. Well, in terms of the Buddhist experience of meditation, for example, they talk about the 16 levels of insight. There's 16 stages of insight that you develop if you start meditating. Now, the thing is that meditation isn't really all that popular because it's a lot of hard work.
Right.
Like in my own mind, I experience union with the universe, but it took me over 20 years to get there, like many years of meditation. So it's like a fairly uncommon understanding.
Sure.
But basically, you can see reality with your own mind. And that basically Ron is a good example of that.
Right. Yeah. I just view it as a gift that some people, you can work at it and some people are better at it than others. I don't know how else to explain it. So,
well, usually there's people have been doing it for many lifetimes. So they have what they call merit. If you meditate a lot in previous lifetimes, the gift is already there. And then you can just expand it and go deeper.
right.
So it's not just all one lifetime thing, it's a number of lifetimes.
Right. Right.
That's one of the other things that happens in Buddhism is you have lifetimes. So,
Sure.
and you have important concepts like karma. Like what happens in a previous lifetime can have a very serious effect on what you are like in the next lifetime. And that's a very serious business.
Sure.
Sort of thing that's not in modern psychology at all.
Right. 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 Okay. So this is our touching. The other thing that comes with mysticism is we end up with the view that we have a physical body that's linked to an immortal soul. So the soul links to the body at birth and stays with this body throughout life. And the soul apparently has a set of goals when it did this incarnation that it wants to achieve. But there's a problem here. It has a veil of forgetfulness. It can't seem to remember what in the world these goals were. They're hidden at the moment of incarnation. So you work through your life, you have free will, you try and achieve these things. At death, the soul unlinks from this physical body and then goes off and there's an assessment of the life against these goals. Everything is looked at there. So our purpose in life, according to, for example, Jesus, is to love yourself and your neighbor, to show compassion for all others, to work through this karma of past lives, to grow and learn. And as you grow, the sense of love grows. So this is a particular view of having a soul and having a body, but the soul is immortal. The bodies come and go.
Yeah, but I'd like to point out in terms of levels of awareness, like if you can go deep enough in your own mind, your own insight into the levels of consciousness, there is a level of reality in your mind that knows all the experiences of all previous lifetimes. And if you've had thousands of lifetimes of experience, that is a reality of experience and insight that's already in your own mind. but this is a level of insight that nobody can find. But everyone has it.
Right. So if it is anywhere, it has to be in this immortal soul. This immortal soul has to have a record somehow of all those previous lifetimes.
Yeah. I don't know what I call it, immortal soul. I mean, one of the things about when you get into the deeper levels of insight and meditation, love and compassion is a reality. So you feel a union with the universe. So considering yourself like a separate soul.
No, I don't think the soul is separate. I think the soul is linked to the rest of the universe. It's a little piece of it that the universe is into the soul. Everything is linked to everything else. But this is the mystic side. How is this done?
Yeah. Well,
we're not going to settle it here, but I'm just saying.
No.
This model here is an amazing statement of mysticism and what's going on. So, for example, in the Council of Nicaea in 325, when Constantine was pushing the church to come up with a canon, they decided the notion of having an immortal soul is there in Judaism. It's there, but the problem with that is that you can't control someone because, geez, if you tell them, well, this is your only life, and then you're going to be judged and go to hell or go to purgatory or go to heaven, then you have real control over them in this life. If they know that they have an immortal soul, so if they get killed, then they'll reincarnate later. You lose that notion of control. And so it's something that was just deliberately thrown out. It wasn't an accident to be able to control people in the church starting in 325. And Constantine did this because he needed soldiers for his legions, and all of the commoners were becoming Christians. And if they're becoming Christians, he didn't have control over it. So he said, I've got to have control over this. What can I do? The Roman nobility were still paying lip service to the Roman gods, but it was really the bulk of the people that bought into Christianity.
Well, the other part of it is that I looked at, there's a whole history in the Middle East that, they have two major concepts that are not in Buddhism. One is that there is a God, and the other is that you have free will. Like the relatives of insight into the deeper levels of the mind don't have those components.
Right.
And that's one of the problems with the Western way of thinking of the mind or consciousness or awareness is that it's not trustworthy. Because with free will, you can either be a saint or a murderer, I mean, where's that at?
Right.
The other major problem it has is that you're a born sinner. I mean, what kind of concept of that is of consciousness? So this is one of the problems with the Middle East. Like there's a political religious movement that happened way before Christ that they decided to control people by blaming everything on women, and that you can go to heaven or hell decided by a god. I mean, it's whereas in the world of Buddhism, when you start to have great insight into the mind levels of your own consciousness, none of those things work or apply anymore. So.
Right. Now, this notion of free will is captured in this. I touched on it briefly, this notion in quantum mechanics of having many worlds. So you can go this way, you could become a poet, you could become a saint, or you could become a murderer. You could go, but and when you actually look at it, you're driven down a particular path. It appears that you've got this freedom, but and the freedom probably in some timeline is there, but in the bulk of what you do, you're not really having that much freedom. You have you have the free will to realize that you don't have free will.
Well, the thing is that one of the concepts that sort of explains a lot of that is karma.
Right.
Like a lot of things. Like, I mean, my favorite example, if you encounter somebody who has a lot of rage, the first thing that comes up in their mind is rage.
Right.
It generally means that they've killed somebody in their previous life.
Right.
And whereas the other end of the scale, like I had a meditation teacher who had a vast reality of compassion. I mean, and he had insights into the levels of the mind that you couldn't even possibly imagine.
Right. Right.
So I have a problem with the unfoldment of the West in terms of understanding the mind or consciousness.
Right.
Free will being one of the big ones, and believing that there's a God outside of your own mind.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's what we're gonna try and deal with here. I'm just trying to give you a framework here, a foundational framework, so we can actually discuss these things. So you're absolutely right on. Okay, this takes us off into a different realm, and it's 22. So I would argue, let us call it a night, and we will reconvene next week to dig through some more of this foundational stuff. Does that sound good?
Right. Sounds good.
Okay.
I want to
Great.
apologize for the way I jumped up. Something didn't agree with me. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
What's that?
Something didn't agree with Marjorie. That's why she took a quick exit, but we're
okay.
Wasn't anything anybody said. I think it was something I ate.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can leave out the details.
Yeah.
Right.
We will.
We'll
We
leave it
will.
at that.
But thank you for coming, Bruce, and we will
All
see
right.
you next week.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Are we on for
We're doing it
Wednesday?
on Wednesdays at
At
7
7.
o'clock. Wednesdays at 7. So far, we're still on Eastern Daylight Time.
Okay.
So we'll see you then. I'll send out another note. You'll
All right.
see. Okay. Have a good.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye.